Okay, there's 3 kids in this one. That's nice. It may wrap up a little early. How do people sit down? Ugh. So have you planted the astilbes by the side of the house?
I have.
Oh, I can't wait to see them.
Can you believe it?
Yup. Actually, I can, and given the way this whole thing is unfolded, if I were you, I'd just sort of archive the email chain.
Yep.
I mean, in part just because it's a great story for telling at a cocktail party,
Right.
but also just, I mean.
Oh, I mean, what's the lesson for me about adding value in your academy? I mean, if anything I do can be wrong, I mean, to put it another way, right? Let's suppose that some child didn't conclude, oh, well, this means that prom is going to continue as normal, right? What exactly would the problem be?
Well, he's just a dick. Hey, I should have people in this session. And indications are that I am in the right place, but where are they? So is there an astilbe out here? I just can't see. I'm not trying to be difficult.
Oh, no, I planted on the driveway side.
Okay.
I haven't planted anything over in the pot.
Hello, Sydney. How are you?
I'm good. How are you?
Very good. Sorry, I just realized I'm looking and I'm like, I do not look like a flaming torch. I need to turn my camera. So
I need to turn mine on too, actually.
there we go.
I just need to make sure Fed has the link for this because I'm not sure. I'm not sure if he found it or not.
Oh,
He's
okay.
Another student who's going to be in this meeting. He's one of my classmates.
Oh, okay. Federico?
Yes.
Okay. Okay, yes, right, because you're both from the University of Hartford. Yes, I see. Thank you.
Mm-hmm. I emailed it to him, but I hope he saw it.
Okay. Well, it is in several places, so hopefully he will come upon it. So what have you thought of the conference so far?
Pretty cool. Very impressive to get this many students from around the region. Let's see. He just answered.
Oh, good. Okay.
Let's see, what can I do? What can I do? What can I do? I wish I had his number. Next time I'm going to get his number. Next time I'm just going to get the guy's number.
Well, when partnering with men, that is not necessarily a bad idea. I just sort of keep on top of things.
Yes. I did have his number at one point, but I've lost it since. So I'm got to get myself together. At this point, I'm just sending him multiple things and I hope he's reading. But so please remind me, I don't know if you've said your name.
I'm Susan Dinan and I am the moderator. So
Well,
welcome.
hello, Susan. Thank you very much. A little nervous.
Oh, it'll go fine. And no, I've been impressed. I think people are, the students are well prepared. I think all the presentations have gone well. I mean, this is a strange format, but it does mean that more people can participate because getting everybody to Pittsburgh is expensive and complicated. And so I think it's been nice. I think more of us can be part of it in this format. So
that's true. It's got its pros and its cons.
Indeed, indeed. Hello, Elizabeth. How are you? Hope you're muted.
Thank you. I said I'm good. How are you?
I'm well. I'm Susan Dinan. It's nice to meet you.
Nice to meet you. And this is my student, Saray. Hi, Saray.
Hello, Saray. I'm Susan Dinan. I will be the moderator.
Oh my. I don't think he received the email.
Uh-oh.
Because I sent him a picture of what it should look like, the email, but don't know if I sent him the link to this because I selected attend and it brought me to another link.
Oh,
so I sent him that link.
Okay.
Let's hope it works. Please let it work because he's got such a great project.
Okay. And so Sydney and Federico both attend University of Hartford, but Federico is having some trouble getting to the session. So she is trying to help him. Now the order that is listed in the conference guide is that Saray will go first. Is that okay with you? Okay, so we will begin with Saray, and then we will go to Sydney, and we will wrap up with Federico. So if it takes him a little while to get here, he has some space, and we will move on. So I am Susan Dinan. Welcome. I am the Dean of the Honors College at Adelphi University, which is on Long Island. And the session that we are currently attending is on the visual arts, and we have 3 presentations this afternoon. The first by Saray Vazquez from the Macaulay Honors College at CUNY, and her project is entitled The Never Ending Project, dealing with grief and loss in the visual arts. The second presentation will be made by Sydney Samele. Am I pronouncing that properly?
Samele.
Samele, thank you. Sydney Samele from the University of Hartford, and her work is on the Print-demic flood mythology. And then our third presentation will be given by Federico Rosario, also of the University of Hartford, and his presentation is entitled Rufino, Tamayo, Redefining the Norm. What I thought we would do is ask, each student to give their presentation, because there's only 3 of you. We'll have some wiggle room in terms of timing. So let me suggest, and you can tell me if you think this is a good idea, that we will go through each paper. And if anyone has a pressing question about a paper that was just presented, we can have that question addressed right away. And then we can hold other questions until the end, because if the earlier sessions are anything to go by, there will be connections between the works that we may want to talk about in the questions that we pose. So we can do questions right after presentations if something's immediate, and if not, then we'll wait and we'll have a more involved session, question session at the end. So Saray, let us begin with you. You should have permission to share your screen, so you should be good to go.
I'm so sorry. Can I just Fed can't use the link because it's my personal link. Is there another way we could send him this link?
Let me ask, Chris Britton is in charge of technology. Let me contact him and ask him how we go about getting Federico into the room with us. And Saray, if you would begin, please.
Can everybody see my presentation here?
Yes, thank you.
Okay. Hi, everybody. My name is Saray Vazquez from CUNY Macaulay Honors College, and I'm presenting on my project called The Never-Ending Project, Dealing with Grief and Loss in the Visual Arts. And I guess I'll just mention in the beginning that I'm presenting on a visual project where I did start off doing research and some writing, but it transitioned into this visual project. So this project focuses on how I used photography to process the loss of my father, both to Alzheimer's and dementia, and his eventual passing in June 2020. This project has been a culmination of photos that I've taken in the past 3 to 4 years, which is when I first started taking photos and first decided to start documenting my family life, and in particular, our interactions with my father as his illness progressed and we were aware of his Alzheimer's diagnosis. Some trouble advancing here. Oh, sorry, I might have to, I think I just somehow went all the way to the end of my presentation. Sorry about that. So I did want to mention that this was one of the first photographs that I took in this series. And so I'll mention that although I did mention that I've taken photos in the past 3 to 4 years, the photographs that I'm showing in this presentation and that I submitted to the art gallery are photos that I've taken after his passing. So I wanted to talk a little bit about my past work, which consisted of environmental portraits. And I think this is kind of a precursor to what I'm doing now. This photo is from 2019, which I took with a 4x5 view camera, and is also related to my father's dementia and illness. Here's another example of a 4x5 black and white film photography that I did while my father was still alive and going through the process of rehabilitation after a major obstacle hospitalization. So I thought I'd talk a little bit about my influences. The one photographer that I'm really emphasizing here is Sally Mann, and this is a photo of her son here. And she's known for a lot of these portraits of her children and family in kind of the environment of Virginia where she lives. And so I've found this as great inspiration even before I started this project, because I just really like the interaction between the subject and the environment, because I feel that the environment is equally as important as the subject matter here. And I think I also mentioned that another photographer that I really influenced my work was Judith Joy Ross, who did large format photographs that were just straight on portraits of people in her community. So I've transitioned, sorry, from these environmental portraits that I've done in the past, I've transitioned a little bit more to still lives and landscapes. And I think I'll define still lives here in the typical sense. You think of maybe flowers or you know, fruits set on a backdrop. And here it's somewhat similar, it might look a little bit different, but these are objects that are placed into a scene that I've created. And so I'll delve a little bit into my methods and reasoning behind each type of photograph that I've taken so far. So I'll go into still lives first, where these are still lives using objects that are relevant to my father's illness and somewhat to his death. For example, these are 2 photographs where I've used wristbands from his hospital visits and you know, where he was in a rehabilitation center because of his dementia. And I want to emphasize this interaction between nature and these objects. These are 2 more photographs objects that were related to his death, but these two in particular are of some objects that I packed into a bag the day that my father passed away. I'm assuming that he was going to go to the hospital that day. And something that I'd like to point out about these objects and images is that, you know, of the objects that I packed that day, a lot of them were disposable and single use, like masks or diapers. And so I think these photographs, one, address how do we deal with objects once a loved one passes away. And here, after his passing, these objects were somewhat rendered useless, but now given a whole other sentimental value. So I think that's one reason why I decided to take these somewhat immediately after his death. And so I wanted to talk about still lives using these 4x6 prints. Sorry. Some of these are the first images that I took following my father's passing. And I used 4x6 prints that are photos taken in my childhood, and also prints and photographs that I took myself. I think these images using the 4x6 prints really helped me address these immediate questions. Again, how do we interact with photographs following someone's passing? And I think they also helped address a question of identity that I had once my father passed away. When he passed away, I was no longer a caregiver, and I had also become somewhat of a parent myself, and then I lost all of that. I think you could even say that I use these 4x6 prints to partially fill the absence of my father. And I also had to face images of myself as a child when I didn't have to, you know, face all of this kind of inner turmoil. And something else that, you know, this is me right here. Something else that I do want to mention is that especially these childhood prints are originals. They're only one copy. And in most cases, I think the negatives are gone. So I do want to say that I did not treat them as sacred, because I've been asked before, are these shrines? And I don't think they're necessarily shrines in that I almost handle them casually. And I do want to take them out of context of a photo album. Whereas I think when you look at photos in a photo album, you're reminiscing and it's a lot of positive memories. But I think with a parent's death, you're faced with a lot more heavier topics and just emotions. And so now we'll talk about landscapes. I think that landscapes offered a different type of reflection for me in the face of this loss. I've been focusing on landscapes more recently. And I've always been interested in the role of landscapes in showing personal history. A photographer that I was very interested in who works in landscapes is Samele, and she photographs Vietnam War reenactments and also follows the Navy in one of her projects in their training bases and across the world. And so she's juggling sort of this larger loss, societal loss of the Vietnam War. And so for me in particular, I think that one of the questions that I'm trying to address in these landscapes is, how can I show the existence of like my life, my being on this small piece of land that's my backyard? And similarly, how can I show my father's existence despite the fact that he's gone? So here's another example of a landscape that I felt was a very significant step for me. And so I do want to mention that I think that landscapes offer me a very meditative space, because I think some might say, how many pictures can you take of your backyard? It's very limited, but I think that with very careful observation and mindfulness, you could get so much more out of such a limited space. And so in the actual process of taking these photographs, I do feel that I work a lot slower than in portraits that I used to do, and even some of the still lives that I take. So I hope that these landscapes in particular are more open-ended images for viewers who may not have experienced the same type of loss that I have, but can also feel that and get that meditative space that photography may offer me. And so in that sense, although this project was created in response to the loss of my father, my intention is that it creates a space for anyone that experienced any type of loss. And I have a very broad definition of loss here. There's no one way to grieve. So I hope that this could give you all some insight in how I've used photography and the visual arts to do so. Thank you.
Thank you very much. That was it was beautifully done. Thank you. And I'm sure I speak for all of us when I just say how sorry I am that you lost your father once. I mean, or twice, and how difficult that must be. Thank you for sharing this with us. Professor, is it Rice or Reese?
It's Reese.
Reese, Professor
Yes.
Reese, please.
Thank you. This was beautiful. Sorry. I don't remember hearing before that you found a parallel between your work and Sally Mann's work, which is so interesting to me because I love her work too. And I see, you know, as you were talking, I'm thinking, yes, there's a lot of, she brings up questions about loneliness and death also, and insecurity, I think. I feel like there's I see many parallels, but then I'm also aware of the controversy around her, particularly having to do with consent and the pictures that she took of her children. And that made me wonder if your father knew about all the pictures that you were taking, and if you had talked about, you know, if the issue of consent ever came up with him.
Yeah, I mean, that's a very interesting question that hasn't been like posed to me before, so I'm really glad to answer it here. My dad was really active in the photos that I took before the last year of his life. You know, he was very aware and he loved having his picture taken. He was just, you know, I don't know if it's also the fact that part of why I decided to take photos of him and document his life was because he didn't have any images of himself in his youth. He had one photo, I think, of his late teens, and that's all I have to, you know, and that he had of himself. But I guess in terms of when his illness was even more progressed in that last year, I guess that's a little bit more difficult. I can't say if he would have said no. I can't really say, but maybe in knowing that this has been very helpful, I think, for myself in processing kind of, you know, what we've all gone through. It might have been worth it.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, I don't know your father, obviously, but I feel like you had such a loving relationship, it seems to me, that I can't imagine he wouldn't have wanted you to do it.
Thank you. I wonder if we have any other questions for Saray now, or if we shall go on and have a second paper and then come back and have broader questions at the end. Before I do that, is there anyone who has a question they'd like to pose right now? Okay, thank you. So Sydney, you will give the second presentation today, and Sydney is going to present on Print-demic flood mythology, and you should have the ability to share your screen. Sydney, you are muted.
Sorry about that. Can you see?
Now I'm muted. Yes, we can see. Thank you.
Okay. Presenter. Okay. Is it full screen?
I think given the way that Zoom is set up, yes, if someone feels that there's a better way to do this, you can let Sydney know, but yes, there we go. That would be more of a full screen.
Okay, hold on. Let's see if I can get that. I am not very good at technology. I am sorry. Saray, I was saying when I was muted, thank you for your presentation. It was a really great presentation. And I actually, we can do this after, but I'd like to comment on some things, but that's for later. So you guys can see my screen and everything's all set, right? We're good?
We are good. Your speaker's notes are now in front of the PowerPoint, though.
You shouldn't be able to see that. Oh
Well,
dear.
sorry. The mystery is, we are seeing behind the curtain here. So.
Oh dear. How can I fix that so that it doesn't do that? Why is it doing that? It shouldn't be able. I don't know why. Let me try that again.
Maybe if you share just your Google Chrome window rather than your whole desktop, it might.
Yes, possibly. Did that work?
It did. Thank you.
Whoops. I just want to make sure I get this right. But now, oh, I can't access my notes, and I want. Well, I could. I don't want to wing it. Can you see the presentation and not my notes? Yes. Phew, that's a relief. Got that. I'm going to put my glasses on so that I can read, and we're going to start this thing. Okay, so hi everyone. My name is Sydney Samele. I'm a senior printmaker and illustrator from the University of Hartford. Thank you so much to the North Regional Honors Conference for asking me to present my work, and to the University of Hartford for nominating me as one of their student representatives. I want to thank my professors Kathleen Schrader and Tatiana Potts, who have helped me so much through this project. So in this presentation, I will share with you my inspiration, introduce my body of work, and contemplate a connection between the flood mythology and the COVID-19 pandemic. My art explores transformation through water. In my work, I discuss stories in which water plays a dominant role in the form of world floods, also known as flood mythology. Mythology has always been one of my greatest inspirations. I found that civilizations from our history have preserved their own existence in the myths that so many people write off as fiction. These stories reveal the lifestyles, problems, solutions, beliefs, and cultures. I dove deep into the realm of flood mythology to recover the myths that consistently reappear in history. The myths serve as a record of people's past ordeals. My work is strongly influenced by ukiyo-e print designers from Japan's Edo period. Ukiyo-e translates to pictures of the floating world. These prints encompassed subject matters such as kabuki actors, daily life, and landscape. Ukiyo-e prints actually influenced Impressionism in Europe. Katsushika Hakusai and Utagawa Hiroshige were two of the most prominent ukiyo-e print designers of their time. I look to their work as inspiration for my own. So I'm drawn to the compositional elements, stylistic techniques, and color combinations found in ukiyo-e prints. In Hiroshige's multi-block print, The Sea at Sada, a large wave creates a strong diagonal line through the foreground, capturing the movement of water. The serene landscape bears witness to this otherwise unseen natural event. One of the most fascinating characteristics of ukiyo-e prints is the integration of Western influence. Hakusai's Fishing in the Surf is a multi-block aitsuri print. Aitsuri translates to indigo picture, meaning that the image was printed with Prussian blue ink, which was imported from Berlin at the time. Prussian blue, sometimes referred to as Berlin blue, has become, was a very popular color at that time. With all of that said, I will now move on to my work. My body of work reinterprets the meaning of flood mythology as both a metaphor for disaster and as a way to emphasize people's resilience, perseverance, and ingenuity in finding a solution to an impossible problem. The first print in my series is called Ark. Ark is a multi-block relief print that resembles the I Eat Suri prints, like Hakusai's Fishing in the Surf. In this image, the reed boat rides a wave through a rainstorm. I printed 3 separate layers. The first linoleum block that I carved and printed was the color blend in the sky. The second block provided the details of the boat, the water, and the clouds. The third block I printed the rain. This print links together Noah's Ark from the Bible and Utnapishtim from the Epic of Gilgamesh. These 2 stories originated in ancient Mesopotamia, which influenced my decision to incorporate a reed boat. Reed boats are traditional vessels from ancient Mesopotamia. These stories are almost identical in narrative, with a few key differences. Utnapishtim received immortality from his gods after the flood, while Noah and his god made a covenant. These stories were adopted by many different cultures and reshaped to meet the needs of the people at that time. My intention was to create a print that could transparently be read as Noah's Ark or Utnapishtim. This detail provides a closer look at the animals in the boat. You will see 2 giraffe heads poking out from under the roof. An elephant stands next to them, looking out at the water, and below sits a lion. 2 zebras stand out on the deck, unsheltered, while a bird leads the boat through the storm towards a safe haven somewhere beyond the image area. The bird represents both the dove from Noah's Ark and the sparrow from Utnapishtim. Japanese printmakers are commonly known for creating several different color versions of the same image with a different, So in an act of experimentation, I printed this image with a different color palette. I mixed a color blend of magenta, red, and yellow ink for the sky and used a chocolate brown ink for the water, clouds, and the boat. You will notice that I did not include rain in this print. I thought perhaps by removing the rain, I could grasp a different point in the story, such as the end of the storm where the sun begins to rise. The second print I want to share is Gilgamesh's Loss. This is a reduction print illustrating the final moments of Gilgamesh's failed quest for immortality. Here, a snake swims into the foreground, carrying a plant-like object in its mouth. Its body wraps around a flooded mountainside. A figure, with his back facing us, relaxes in a natural pool, unperturbed by this abnormally large snake and wave. Again, the ukiyo-e style appears in the composition and the colors. Printing a reduction like this is a very challenging process. I began with a drawing that I transferred to a linoleum block. I carved out the areas of the image that I wanted to stay white, such as the foam and the waves. Then I printed my first state. I returned to the block and carved some more away and printed the next state. Here I have included pictures of my first 3 states. I repeated my steps all the way until I've carved the entire block away. In state 1, I printed the sky, the blue and the magenta. In the second state, I printed the water, And in the third state, I printed the mountainside. Here are states 4, 5, 6, 7, and 8, where I focused on the figure and on the snake. I began sketching this idea out in the fall semester and began officially printing it in the spring semester. It took me a month to print this piece from start to finish. I printed the colors in order from lightest to darkest. So it took a total of 9 states to complete. Here is a detail of state 9. The Epic of Gilgamesh is the earliest epic in history, making Gilgamesh the first recorded hero. The survivor of the Great World Flood, Utnapishtim, told our hero to seek out the plant of rejuvenation. Gilgamesh successfully retrieves this plant, only to lose it to a snake while bathing in a pool. From then on, snakes have had the ability to shed their skin and rejuvenate themselves. Only through this crushing defeat could Gilgamesh come to terms with his own mortality. The third print in my series is The End of the Bronze Age. This relief print was inspired by one of many Greek floods. The image depicts a mass of water spilling from the sky, surrounded by storm clouds and lightning. 2 boats on either side of the image are caught between the water and the rocks. The force of the flood is undeniable as it collides into the boats and rushes towards the viewer. There is no escape from this seemingly inexplicable disaster. To create this image, I carved my drawing into one block and its mirror image into a second block. Then I printed them side by side, and the 2 blocks created one long print. This detail provides a closer look at the hand-carved areas. This flood destroyed what was known as the Bronze Age, a time when gods created people from bronze. Deucalion and Pyrrha are 2 people who survived this flood. This disaster represents the wrath of Zeus. Deucalion and Pyrrha only survived thanks to a warning from Prometheus. Because the 2 were pious, Zeus allowed them to live and repopulate the earth. The use of a mirror image is a reflection of the floods that continue to wipe out humanity every time people lose themselves. Again, I created a second version. I printed 2 separate editions of this image, one on tan paper and one on white paper. This is the final print in this body of work. This one is called Primordial Waters. It is a relief print on papyrus depicting a flood that wraps around 3 pyramids and flows into a great wave with a crocodile god directly below its crest. Egyptian hieroglyphs run in columns from left to right behind the image. Here it is evident that this series of work combines Western subject matter with Eastern art styles, very much a reflection of my own identity as an Asian American. This piece is influenced by Hakusai's Mount Fuji seen below a wave at Kanagawa, and of course the origin of Egyptian mythology. This piece describes the origin of ancient Egypt, whose culture revolved almost entirely around the Nile River. In the beginning, there was only Nu, the primordial waters. A mound rose from the water called the Benben. Plants began to grow from the Benben, creating life. Egypt's origin can be seen every year with the flooding of the Nile River. When the river floods, it destroys everything in its path. When the water recedes, mounds of silt appear and vegetation begins to grow anew. Their culture surrounds the idea of birth, death, and rebirth, always changing. The monumental pyramids we know today come from the little mounds of silt in the Nile. The hieroglyphs come from the Book of Overthrowing Apep. They tell the story of Egypt in the form of spells and incantations that were meant to protect the sun god Ra and the reigning pharaoh. The crocodile god Sobek guards the Nile, and people from Egypt, or at this time people of Egypt, saw him as a god of fertility, protection, and life. You will notice 3 of the 4 prints do not depict the main characters of their myths. This invites the viewer to consider placing themselves in the narrative. Overwhelming odds is not an unfamiliar feeling. In the past, people have faced problems as great as today's pandemic. It seems only right to seek their guidance in these challenging times. The COVID-19 pandemic is a world flood, essentially. While this comparison does not necessarily make our situation more uplifting, it does promise a new beginning. The world will never be the same as it was before the pandemic. Instead, we will emerge into a world reborn. I'd like to conclude with a quote by anthropologist Malinowski. Myth, in its living, primitive form, is not merely a story told, but a reality lived. You can follow me on my Instagram at riverwindart or contact me at my email, sydneysamele@gmail.com. Thank you again to the North Regional Honors Conference for asking me to present my work, and to the University of Hartford for nominating me as a student representative. And if you're interested, I have my cited sources if you wanted to check that out. I actually have the translation of those hieroglyphs if you really wanted to see what it reads as, but that's it. Any questions?
Thank you very much, Sydney. That was beautifully done. Are there questions for Sydney, or shall we move on and have questions for everyone at the end? Okay, I'm going to take that as we will wait for questions until the end. Sydney, thank you again. Federico, you are up next, and Federico will be making his presentation on Rufino Tamayo, Redefining the Norm. Federico is also a student from the University of Hartford. And Federico, you should have the ability now to share your screen.
Hi, thank you. Yes.
And I will compliment you on wearing the snazziest shirt I have seen all day. That's marvelous.
Thank you. Thank you. I actually got it in Mexico. Okay. Can everybody see?
Yes, it's come through very clearly.
Okay. All right, awesome. Well, hello, everybody. My name is Federico Rosario. I'm from the University of Hartford, and today I'm going to be talking about Rufino Tamayo and redefining the norm and what that means for him in solving this impossible question. A couple focuses here are going to be Lo Mexicano, modernism, and murals. When I say Lo Mexicano, it just means this Mexicanness in terms of painting and in terms of his own creative style. So to start off is that what makes a modern artist modern? The problem I've encountered in a lot of my research, not just in this assignment, but also throughout my years at the University of Hartford, is there tends to be problems with classification on defining an artist. Is Rufino Tamayo a Mexican artist? Is he a modern artist? Is he a Mexican modern artist? Essentially, how are we defining artists of our time? So I'm going to be talking about his biography, a little bit about who he is and how his aspirations to become an artist and his development into painting is a direct reflection and kind of a rebellion against murals and the Mexican Revolution at the time. And then I'm going to talk about two very specific works, El Hombre, painted in 1953, a little focus on cross-cultural fermentation and fusion and what that means for him. And then the Naturaleza Muerta, which just means a still life, painted in 1954. And we'll just talk about little formal elements here about colorism and form. So Rufino Tamayo. Rufino Tamayo is a Oaxacan painter, active in the years of 1899 to 1991. He attended the School of the Arts in Mexico City in 1917. He graduated in 1921. But he went against his studying after his graduation and began to study independently. And in between the years of 1921 and 1926, he became the department head of the ethnographic drawing at the Natural Museum of Archaeology. So this was incredibly impressionable on him because here he began to experience, he came in contact with, and he began to experience artifacts from indigenous populations. And these were very influential in his art making. And all of this pre-Columbian artifacts were also very relevant to him as well, especially on what defines the Mexican title, that notion of what it is to be Mexican. In the later half of the 1920s, he lived in New York City, the epicenter of modern art at the time. And there he was exposed to a global network of artists at different modern exhibitions, such as Pablo Picasso and Henri Matisse. Stylistically, the European avant-garde movement had an incredible impact on him as well. And the reason for this is because of the high concentration of socio-political art in Mexico at the time. You see, Tamayo was very fond of pure painting. His approach was to focus on elements such as color and form, and most importantly, sensation. And so at the time in Mexico, murals were dominating the art form. For example, the big three, Diego Rivera, Jose Clemente Orozco, and David Siqueira, were all making huge impacts on Mexico's scene, as well as making a scene internationally. So when the international audience would think of Mexico, they would think of these giant murals. And while that's beautiful, that is incredible, the Mexican voice is making its way beyond the borders. The problem, though, especially in Tamayo's vision, is that this is not a clear representation of our population. It is not the clear voice of the Mexican public. And the reason he says that is because of the socio-political impacts that it has. The thing about Diego Rivera, as in this La Historia de México, the Mexico's history, painted in 1929 to 1930, is that it pushes forward the narrative of socialism. And at the time, following the Mexican Revolution, they wanted to get rid of European influence. They wanted to expel all of foreign power that once tainted the lands of Mexico. And they wanted to focus on indigenismo, the indigenism, right? So what these artists, the big three, Diego Rivera and the other two muralists at the time were trying to do is vocalize the power of Native culture. And that is very similar to what Tamayo is doing, but Tamayo just did not like that these works were pushing forward this political agenda rather than really putting the important matter on the forefront. That is culture, that is the voice of the people, that is everything to do with what it means to be Mexican. And so, and because of this, because of his active resentment towards this growing movement, he moved to New York City in the 20s, and he stayed there until about the 30s. He would fly back to Mexico here and there. But what I want to focus on is after 1952, because in 1952 is when Tamayo was actually gaining traction, not just abroad, but also in Mexico, because at the time he was seen as a traitor to the movement. The effects of the Mexican Revolution in taking pride of your national heritage, your cultural heritage, just was not in line with what the Mexicans saw. The Mexicans saw that Tamayo was a traitor, right? So Beyond 1952, he began to paint murals as well. So the first one I'm going to talk about is El Hombre, painted in 1953. It's final with pigment on panel. So what we can see is a man reaching toward the sky. And this is where we really focus on the Cubist influence. We can definitely see that this is almost European modernism influence on him. He was greatly appreciative of Pablo Picasso. He admired Pablo Picasso. I mean, who could not, right? But yeah, it's a man reaching forward. He's painted in these beautiful earthly ochres. He's cut up almost by the wind, almost cut up with the stars in the sky, the constellations, the moon is swifted right around, leaning towards him, almost within arm's reach. The thing that's very prominent during these series of paintings is that there's this sense of alienation of the man. The night sky is very particular in a lot of Tamayo's paintings, most specifically to El Hombre though, is because Tamayo feared of advancement and technology, but it was almost in the sense of awe. He was fearful of how it could grow and how it could develop his home country, but he was also just very fascinated about what this could mean for the future. In the lower half, we see an armadillo as well, which is very popular in Mexico. And yeah, so beyond this as well is that we begin to talk about this man, this what Rufino Tamayo calls the pre-Columbian man or the primordial man. And to him, this figure can transform based on his surroundings. And that is what evolves this native, just primordial spirit into the cosmic. And so what Tamayo is trying to push forward here is almost a direct reflection on the post-war image of Mexico. Now in the 1950s, following the war, Mexico wants to open its borders and interact with an international community. It wants to compete and it wants to continue this ongoing dialogue of trade, of opening influence, of allowing foreign influences to come in, something that the muralists were completely against. And so in doing so, Tamayo was able to almost fuse both his pre-Columbian imagery from when he worked at the Ethnograph Museum with the modernist influence of Europe. And Octavio Paz, who was a very profound intellectual at the time, on reviewing of Tamayo's images, claimed that man as a glyph. He would say that man is a glyph. You can tear it apart, decipher it. You can use it for whatever you'd like, and whatever you can do it as, more power to you. And that's what Tamayo took. So in doing so, he did the abstract figuration, not really figurative abstraction, but rather abstract figuration. This is transforming the man. And then we get to the next one, which is watermelons. So the thing with Tamayo is that Tamayo really put forward color. He was very interested in color. And what this meant for Mexico really was, at the time, was to go against the muralists. Really, that was Tamayo's forefront at the time. Above anything, Tamayo was a colorist. He wasn't a draftsman. He didn't like to draw. He didn't really identify drawing as a concrete art. Which is very funny considering his working past, but yes. And he would put in these hues, almost being painted with sponges, but really it's soft strokes. And it's pretty great. And excuse me. Oh, yeah. So what this leads me to is that Tamayo had this great obsession with watermelons, much like other artists had a time with other fruits and still lifes. But the thing is, what makes this very close with him is that when he was in his adolescence, when he would have to help work with his aunt at a fruit stand. So the watermelon became very close to him. And that's what leads me to my next mural, which is the still life. This was painted in 1954, just a year following the El Hombre, the man. And very similarly, we see different shapes of watermelons. Everything's painted quite differently. There's different styles, there's different forms, and this is what he wanted to focus on. For him, this was the importance of the mural, was to spread a different voice that was not associated with politicism. So we can see here, I tried to get a better image too, but it's kind of difficult. There wasn't really like a long shot of them, but anyway. So yeah, we can see a bunch of watermelons in the forefront, in the background as well, 2 bottles of wine in the center, and a bowl of oranges to the side. The thing that Tamayo does beautifully is that he doesn't really have a giant palette. He doesn't work with multiple colors. In fact, it's almost a sobriety of his palette that really brings out the power of the colors that he chooses. There are always different shades and tints to each color, just to tell one image, just to explain one mural. And what is beautiful about this as well is that this was originally painted for Sanborn's Cafe in Mexico City. And what I thought was really intriguing was that it was about communion. This is a sense of bringing people together without necessarily putting forward this political agenda. And yeah, it was really great. And oh, and what was really important about this as well is that he's really trying to put forth a different type of vision. And yeah. All right, so final thoughts. Tamayo, what I've noticed a lot in my research is that there tends to be critics about him claiming that he's this rootless cosmopolitan. He spent a lot of his years in New York City and in Paris. But what the thing that grounds him with his artwork is that he has this constant worry about the future of Mexico and Mexican arts as well, exactly what it means to be Mexican. His emphasis on color and form and overall sensation really is rooted in that as well, as we can see in his other works. And that's what I think is kind of defining about Lo Mexicano in murals, is his inability or his ability to distance himself from the politicism. And in a way, it is political to be apolitical, but in this sense, by pushing forward a different narrative about the mural and what it means to be a muralist, even though if we claim him to be a muralist, I don't think he would have liked that. It's still a very powerful part in his portfolio during the 1950s. And that overall goes with, how do we categorize an artist? Is he a Mexican artist? Is he a modern artist? Overall, I think, and what my research has told me is that, or what I've inferred from it, is that he's a powerful modern painter. He was, during the time period, he was experimenting with forms beyond the scope of Mexico, beyond the forms of what he was told to use. In a sense of pure painting, he managed to capture color and form to really bring about a new form of telling a story. But yeah, thank you very much. And that's the conclusion.
Thank you very much, Federico. I'd like to thank the 3 presenters, Saray, Sydney, and Federico, for, yeah, I mean, beautiful presentations. I mean, they were, delightful to look at. And then they were the relations that you were able to create sort of between the art itself and then the thinking of the art and the transcendence of the art, I thought was quite striking. I'd like to start by asking if the presenters have questions they would like to ask one another.
I guess the question I like to pose to both of you, Sydney and Federico, is what is your personal connection to the topic that you chose? Sydney, for example, what is your personal connection to the mythology you're interested in, and Federico to Tamayo's work and perhaps his own life?
That's a very, very good question. I think my relationship with my topic, mythology, started when I was learning how to read, when I wanted to read books and learn things. But this particular project was an exploration of Eastern art style for me and Western mythological subject matter. I don't know very much about my Eastern counterpart because I grew up here in the West. So subconsciously, I kind of just was drawn more and more towards Japanese art and other art, Asian art styles. And it kind of just became this project. But I still was very much grounded in my Western mythology. So I guess you could consider this project the start of the next phase of my research, which is diving into Asian mythology, which I have begun doing, but this project was a culmination of my Western and Eastern influences.
Yeah, and I really got into Rufino Tamayo because when I first wanted to think about my honors thesis, I knew I wanted to do something along the lines of Mexican art, simply because if this is what made me mad. If you just Google like Mexican art, we'll always see images of Frida Kahlo, Diego Rivera. And as much as I really adore their own works and all their paintings, it's just that I wanted something deeper, and I wanted something that was almost, I don't know, just modern art in a way. I guess more in terms of like cubism and surrealism. So I found Rufino Tamayo, and the thing is too is that now that I'm at an age where I'm really like thinking about my culture a lot more critically, and I'm like, wow, who am I as a person? And like, you know, other little existential questions. I was like, I'm really connecting with this artist too. He was a little rebel at the time. He was rebellious in the way that he kind of stuck to the norms. Yeah, that was really it.
Thank you for sharing. And I guess both of you kind of have that sort of connection to trying to find or delve a little bit deeper into some culture, you know, where maybe there was information lacking. And I think I relate in some way too. I also illustrate and paint. And so I think I am trying to achieve the same thing in some way. So thanks for sharing.
Thank you for asking. If I may ask you one of my questions. So in your work, I noticed that you had a very intimate relationship, not only with your father, but in your work. And I could really see that. And it makes me wonder, because as an artist, I find process to be very important. When you begin with an idea, you want to explore it. When you end with that project, you're like, yay, it's done. I did it. This is what it is. But the process is really where you think about everything, where everything is happening, coming together, and you're problem solving. So can I ask, what was the process like for you, both when you were thinking about your father and the actual materials that you used?
There is a lot to get into in that question, because I started taking photographs, I think in like either late 2017, early 2018, when my father was, so when I first started college, right before, the summer before, my father was hospitalized. And that's when we were told that he had Alzheimer's. And so, you know, my second semester of college, I just, you know, I had bought a camera at a thrift store, a film camera, and I took like my first intro class. And I realized that this was a way to execute kind of images that I wanted to make myself, but I just couldn't do it in the traditional sense or in the traditional media that I was using. And so I guess at the beginning, there wasn't much thought process other than intuitively taking photographs, you know, a lot of candid photos. And that, I guess that once I started taking large format photography is when I really had to slow down. I don't know if, you know, all of you know what a view camera is, but in working with a view camera, it's such a slow process, right? And you don't want to ruin this negative. And so there's a lot more thought to it. But I was also faced with, at the time when I was taking this class and doing large format, with the fact that my father had been hospitalized again. And then he had to spend an extended amount of time in a rehabilitation center, where it wasn't as convenient to use a large format camera. So in that sense, with that work, there was a lot of like rethinking, how do I maneuver myself? Typically you would use a view camera with a tripod, but in two of the black and white images that I showed there, the one specifically of my father, I had used it almost as a handheld 35mm camera. So there's a lot of maneuvering and being very conscious of your space. But with these recent photos, it was just a lot of moving around, right? I first started using 4x6 prints with this idea of appropriation. How can I use images that I didn't necessarily take? How can I use images that aren't mine, but not necessarily taking it out of like mass media, but of my own personal life? And then I guess in taking these actual photos, these still lives, it's just like me crawling around my backyard, you know, very like just walking around and surveying as the seasons change, to see if there are interesting textures and things like that, and then just moving around. And I think it's just a very organic process, but now I'm trying to be a little bit more thoughtful with these landscapes. So that it's a lot, but thank you so much for asking that question.
Thank you for the answer. That was very in-depth.
I wonder if I could ask a question about process, because there's a real physicality to what you're doing here. I mean, whether it's carving in linoleum, crawling around your, your yard. We'll make a stretch here, Federico. I'm not exactly sure what you're doing here with on the physical front, but I wonder, what is the centrality of the physical process to the art? Because I think as academics, we tend to spend a lot of time doing things, and we go to the gym to be physical, and then we go to the computer to be academics. And your work is fusing these things. And I wonder how the production of art sort of allows these sort of different parts of the brain is too simplistic, but allows you to perhaps think differently from the way people might think if they were not so physically engaged in their work.
That's a very good question. It's complicated because there's many ways to answer it. When I watch people look at my stuff, they're like, oh, cool, because they're seeing the end result. But when I look at my piece, I don't see the end result. I see partially the end result, but I see the weeks of labor that I put into it, all the problems that I faced, all the solutions, the feelings of a little success when I was like, yes, I finished the block, or oh crud, that color doesn't look good. All those little things that I felt, that's what I see when I look at it. But people never got to experience that. My viewers never got to view that. They just see the end result, the print. And I'm like, at the same time, I feel like as much as the end result is great, there's just something about the process that brings your ideas together, your inspirations, your skills. Well, I like to refer to art making as magic. So I guess you could call it that, for lack of better terminology. But it's, I think that's all I have for right now in terms of thoughts, but you got me thinking now.
So I think that's a wonderful question. And I think it's, the physicality of making art has been something that I've enjoyed just as much as just like the subject matter and what I get out of it, because I still work in traditional media, right? And I'm still moving around, and I enjoy the actual process of taking photos and even developing film and handling all of that material. I just feel like maybe there's just like this unspoken feeling of making something, right? I called photography, it's meditative. It offers you some sort of reflection, and even that process, I think, of carving a block can be very meditative, right? And it makes you mindful of your space and your emotions. But I think there's just intense concentration, maybe intense joy that I in particular get out of that physical, action, making art, that maybe I don't get in something else. So yeah, thank you for asking that.
Well, thank you. Those were marvelous responses. I am, and I do history, so I sit, and I'm a dean, and so I do work at a computer, but I knit and I cook and I bake and I garden and I do all of these things because well, and I have a treadmill desk because, as you can tell from the way I'm hopping up and down in my chair, sitting still is not my forte. But but sort of these things that I do to bring physicality into what I do, because the work itself doesn't have that sort of a focus to it. We
think-
have.
oh,
Oh,
sorry.
please.
I think I will argue that because I'm an art history minor, that that being on the computer can be very laborious. I've spent many hours, far too many to count, on the computer, and it does take a toll on your eyes. I'm practically blind, but I feel like it does take a physical toll on you, because it requires such a mental capacity to maintain your focus and your line of thought. And I think Fed could speak to that more, but I've had a taste of it.
Okay. Well, and I think I guess what I'm getting at is the difference between sort of the toil that is contending with the day on Zoom, and perhaps something that allows for more creativity, so that it's a toil, but perhaps it leads to something magical or something different at the end. Professor Oakes, were you going to ask a question, please?
Yes, I have several questions. Saray, am I saying your name right?
Saray.
Okay. I teach a class in dementia, and I just found your talk profoundly moving and inspirational and beautiful. And I hope that you share your work with other people who have gone through your journey and are going through your journey, because I think you can really inspire people. And I would just urge you to think about that, which I'm not sure if you have, but the images were beautiful and the words were beautiful. And I think that could be an inspiration. So I don't have a question as much as a comment about that. Sydney, I have a question for you, and it's
Okay.
I thought the connection between the floods and COVID was so interesting, and the words you used to describe it were really profound. And I wonder at what point that all came to you.
That's a really good question, because I didn't think that, it came after I came up with the idea. I have been honestly thinking about this idea since sophomore year. I have been always researching mythology. I love our cultures and our story and our history. I felt like, what if I made a project? I was thinking at the time making a book, and then it kind of escalated and became my senior thesis. And I was working on the nitty gritty stuff, research and brainstorming, in my junior year. And then COVID hit, and I was brokenhearted, completely brokenhearted when we had to go home. And then I realized, it came to me, wow, this has happened before. This, not only in our most recent actual factual history, this has happened before in our stories, our mythology. And so I did even more research, and I came to the conclusion that this experience, this isolation, everything this pandemic has put us through, it has put us through before. And each time throughout our history, we have stood back up. We have come back from the travesty of whatever we were facing at that time. And it also showed me that we can't fight nature. There's no way we could do that. What we can do, though, is endure. And that is the power of our strength, to endure. And I think we are doing a great job.
Thank you. Just so interesting. And I love that that's your final takeaway, that we will emerge, that there will be a new beginning. I took notes when you were talking. And, and I just have heard you talk about your work through this process, but I had never seen it before, and it was beautiful. All right, and Fed, for you. So how important do you think it is that we categorize Tamayo? Do we need to give him a label, or is transcending a label, is that his label?
Yeah, I think, transcending a label is ideally like the goal. in a way, especially when you're in a playground where you have all these different styles and all these different themes and subsets you can pick and choose from and develop a story of your own. Yeah, so I think transcending is perfect, but it's also kind of difficult to do that in a way, especially when you're learning and you're teaching other people about it without saying like, oh yeah, their work is like inherently Mexican, you know, it's very modernist. It's like, yeah, like those words do help us understand so we can use context and make our own generalizations and like our own things about it, our own ideas about it. But at the same time, like that can also just, you know, box us up, you know, then all of a sudden, oh yeah, he's just that Mexican painter from the 50s, you know. So ideally, yeah, we can transcend, and then all of a sudden he's just an amazing artist, sorry. But it has like just really difficult solutions.
Thank you. Thank you all.
So we have about 5 minutes left, and then they will just sort of mysteriously make us all vanish. So I want to be careful. But I wonder, are there any final questions? Anything that the panelists would like to ask one another? Anything, you know, Professor Oakes, Emily, anything you would like to pose to the artist and art historian?
Not necessarily a question, but I wanted to say I think that you all did a really great job. I'm not very familiar with, you know, art movements and art history, so it was really nice getting to learn more about, you know, these figures and these concepts. And yeah, you all just explained it so beautifully, and you know, we're very engaging. So really, really great job. It was like a really great panel to be on.
Oh, I have a fun little story. I didn't want to mention it during my presentation because I didn't know how I was doing on time, but the one painting I had up about the watermelons that was in the dining room. So when they were moving it to be in an exhibition and about I think it was like 1980, 1988, they took it out and then the conservators went to go clean it up and they discovered that there was just piles of grease on top of the painting. And they were scared that it would ruin like the painting, but when they took it off, it actually preserved the color. So when Tamayo went and looked at it, and after they finished cleaning it, he was like, yes, those are the actual colors that I used. Like it's in perfect condition. And then the other one too of the man, when they were transporting it from, I think it was originally made in Mexico City and they moved it up to Dallas. And now it sits, I think in the Dallas Art Museum, it might be Houston, but it actually fell off of like the train where they were moving it and it was left outside and it endured all the elements for over a year before they finally found it again. And when they found it, it was also in perfect condition too. Yeah.
Wow.
I love stories about artists like that. That's just fun.
It brings us back to the magic, right? Wow.
Oh, I do have a question. Saray, do you have an Instagram?
Yes, I do. I have 2 Instagrams.
Oh, yay.
It's kind of difficult, but my email is in the art gallery panel if you'd like to check it out, because I have a photography one and then one for my illustrations. I don't know if that's too difficult, but I can also share my email in the chat.
Yes, because I just want to see more of your work. I don't think 15 minutes was enough to look at everything.
Yeah, I mean, hopefully I'll be able to publicize somehow on the internet kind of this finished version of my project where it's about 30 or so images compiled into some sort of online book format or maybe an interactive website type of thing, and maybe include some more writing talking about my own experiences. So thank you.
Thank you.
That would be wonderful. I mean, to be able to give your voice a place next to the art, that would just be perfect.
I also just wanted to say really quickly, thank you, Professor Oakes, for your comment. I think like in the process of like, it felt so urgent, like caregiving and my father's, you know, like fast progression that I never, my family and I never had the chance to speak to other people who were also dealing with the same thing. So it's not until now that I feel this moment that I can slow down and really try to like communicate everything that I went through. You know, so it's really great to hear what you thought about the work.
Oh, and to have a recording of your experience as it was happening is a gift that I think you will appreciate, that you have this for the rest of your life, but I think that it can also be helpful to other people.
Thank you.
I do have a question, and it's about the conference. So I think I missed the due date on the art gallery thing, because I don't believe I actually put my stuff in the gallery. Is that still an option, or have I just completely missed that?
I do not know, but you could write to the Chris Britton, who has been moving in and out of every session, is sort of the conference czar. You may reach out to him. I do believe things had deadlines, so I would
Right.
imagine if they were trying to structure and organize things online, it may be too late, but you could certainly ask him. I mean, it may be possible to add things to that archive, because obviously elements of this conference are going to be preserved. So
Perfect. Could you put the email in the chat?
let me see. Yeah, talk amongst yourselves, please.
Fed, I love your hair, man. I love that hair. Online school did something for you.
Yeah. I'm just messing around in my room, just bored, quarantine.
Yeah, I'm surprised my dog didn't start barking. She's somewhere around here.
Sydney, it's in the chat. Now, just understand that he is running around like a madman today. He's been in every session trying to keep an eye on things, but he would be the person to contact, and he may then put you in touch with whomever has organized the art gallery itself. So it may be a multi-step process.
Thank you. I understand I did miss the deadline, but I thought I should at least ask. So
Certainly.
thank you.
All right. Well, I would like to thank the presenters very much. I mean, they were beautiful, thoughtful presentations, and I hope that you have enjoyed the conference thus far, and that you will continue to enjoy it. And we're going to get like zapped any second here. So thank you very much, and it was a real pleasure to hear from all of you.
Thank you very much, everyone. This was a lot of fun.
Thank you, everyone.